Hello there, welcome to my review of the Rockford File Season 5, Episode 11, Local Man Eaten by Newspaper, written by Juanita Bartlett and directed by Meta Rosenberg. This episode marking the first time a Rockford Files would be both written and directed by women. The episode begins with scenes from the inner workings of tabloid rag, the National Investigator, an obvious stand-in for the National Enquirer. Jim walks into their bullpen and is addressed as Henley by Kenneth Teager's Jerry Simpson, so we know he's undercover already. He goes to see editor Harold Whitbeck, played by Scott Brady, in his third role of the series, and is told his work is not sensationalist enough.
Killer bees are stale. They've been done by everybody, up to and including Irwin Allen.
He gives Jim a juicy story and encourages him to make it even juicier. Jim laments the lack of journalistic integrity with Simpson while digging for info on what he's really looking into, where the paper gets some of its more salacious information, particularly medical records, right before his cover is exposed by Whitbeck and another journalist, and he's thrown out. Literally. We then cut to a returning Gianni Russo as Johnny Bongard, showing a film that features his girlfriend Monica, briefly. To, among others, Oggy and Natalie Arno. Everyone apart from the Arnos are having a good time.
You said yourself that street people are trying to cut in on the numbers action in San Diego.
Oh, and they're all mobsters, by the way. Natalie is pushing Oggy to make a move on Johnny, who is the head of the Southern California network. Jim meets with his client, a doctor, at the doctor's office, where they interrupt Oggy and another goon, going through the doctor's paperwork. And while Jim complies with their armed request, the doctor gets shot trying to fend off the goons. With the doctor on life support, Jim and Dennis discuss what happened, and we find out this was not the first break-in, the last resulting in patient information getting leaked to the investigator.
It's the second break in there, right?
Yeah, the first one was about 2 weeks ago. That's when he hired me.
This is another long introduction that packs in a lot of information, although on this occasion very little of it makes what's going on particularly clear. We know why Jim was investigating the investigator, but not what the mob has to do with any of this, or why they were trying to get a peek at the doctor's files, nor what ties them to the tabloid. Things aren't made any clearer when Dennis and Jim confront Whitbeck at the paper to ask if he knows anything about the break-in, and he denies everything, but smells a story.
I want to know everything there is to know about Rockford, and I want it first thing in the morning.
We then find out that Oggy was breaking into the doctor's office with Natalie's brother Leo, and that she was behind it. She wants Oggy to find out who Jim is and finish him off as he can identify the pair.
He knows your face, Augie. He knows Leo's face.
Find out who he is. This is very important, Augie.
The Arnos are really interesting characters, and not like anything we've seen before, thanks in part to how Scott Marlowe and Rose Gregorio play them. While we don't know their exact motives at this stage in the story, Augie is clearly a bit of a doormat, who would rather just be a small cog in whatever machine he's in. But he also loves his wife so much that he will do whatever she says. Meanwhile, she is a very odd bird indeed. She appears quiet, timid and almost ethereal, as if she exists not on this plane of existence, but also has the scheming mind of a Lady Macbeth, very gently but firmly nudging her husband into more and more violent criminal behaviour in order to get ahead. She's a really unsettling character in that respect. We're on firmer territory when Rocky comes to see Jim the next day, only for Jim to discover he's a story in the National Investigator. Outside his trailer, Oggy and Leo have tracked him down and follow him to bump him off, choosing to do so as he meets with his legal advisor, John Cooper. who the paper also names in their hit piece. From hit piece to hit job, Jim is wrongly convinced that the paper is behind it all, but Coop thinks it's far too serious an escalation to be a tabloid journaler.
What they're looking at now is a possible murder rap. Just for a story.
He thinks the break-ins were related, but not done by the same people. Instead, the second break-in done to confirm the story in The Investigator that was a result of the first break-in. And Jim thinks it's a pretty sound theory.
That's it.
That's theory.
Oh, no, Dennis, that's more than just theory. That's it.
While Natalie is convinced that the story was a message from God telling her how to advance Augie's career, we find out that the story claims that Johnny Bongard has terminal cancer, meaning he's now susceptible to a hostile takeover, and this is what Natalie is attempting to orchestrate. While Bongard wants a word with Jim, to find out what he's got to do with all of this. Bongard's goons pick up Jim and Coop, and we may finally get these two tangential stories connected. Or at least we would if Augie and Leo didn't show up and do a drive-by on Bongard. With Johnny dead, Natalie is convinced that Augie will become head of the Southern California business, but Leo informs the Arnos that the investigator is running a follow-up story claiming that Johnny did not in fact have cancer, and so Augie killed a Don for no reason. Which wakes Augie up to what he's done, and why.
I'm not listening, Natalie. That's what happens when you're a dead person.
While Natalie remains delusional, thinking that they can stop the story from running.
There's time for you to stop it.
Jim and Coop con their way into the investigators' offices, trying to find out who's responsible for this mess, while at the same time, Augie and Leo try to stop the story from running by burning the place to the ground. Setting the fire before trying to get the story, Augie and Leo get caught by Jim and Coop before they're all picked up by the cops. And we find out that it was actually Natalie that set the fire. Delusional up until the end. This is an incredibly ambitious episode of television that I think, for the most part, nails it. By giving us only parts of the story, which has already begun when we join it, we are left somewhat in the dark over what's going on, until the end. And that is such a hard line to walk, as you risk confusing or losing the viewer along the way. But by giving us just the right information at the right time, we're able to not just follow, but also assemble the pieces as we go. But none of that plot is actually what the story is about, and that's the real genius. This is a story about how dangerous, factually inaccurate, sensationalist news can be when it bumps up against people with mental illnesses. Natalie is delusional, hearing the voice of God and seeing visitations from saints and the dead, and so when she reads a trumped-up news story about how a mob boss is dying of cancer, this feeds her delusion that her nebbish husband can be the new boss, and results in the death of two people, and the destruction of her life and that of her husband and brother.
I believed what I read.
In this story, Jim is essentially a passive observer, but he's our way into this story about the importance of unexpected consequences. He's just there trying to find out who stole medical records, but the bigger story is how the theft of those records was abused by an unscrupulous newspaper in a sensationalized story in order to sell more copy, that resulted in an unstable woman manipulating her husband into murder. This is particularly prescient in a world now flooded with misinformation, not even pretending to be legitimate news, that is convincing people to commit heinous acts. I do think that the final act is a little rushed, and I don't think Coop is particularly necessary to the story. But other than that, this is such a hidden gem of a thought-provoking episode that I don't think it spoils the overall message of the episode to have one or two little flaws. It also manages to evoke a particularly unsettling atmosphere whenever Natalie is in a scene. that I have to praise Meta Rosenberg's direction for, as it rests squarely on her shoulders for this episode. It's just so eerie. So for me, this is another 5 out of 5 episode. Thank you. Goodbye.